The guiding industry in British Columbia has a proud history, one that evolved with the fur trade, and it's closely intertwined with the province's First Nations people. Fur traders coming overland from regions such as Montreal relied heavily upon knowledgeable First Nations people to guide them to British Columbia's expansive interior and the wildlife riches that resided there. It was in the late 1800s that the world's hunting fraternity first recognized that British Columbia harbored some of North America's most magnificent big game populations. In response, local hunters started guiding services, often employing local First Nations to assist them, enabling non-resident hunters to access wildlife and the untouched and difficult-to-reach wilderness expanses of the province. In reality, this was the start of British Columbia's tourism industry. In the early years, hunting activities were largely unregulated. There were a few bounties on what were deemed problem species, some very limited protection legislation, and the ability to levy fines.
In the province was a fellow named A. Brian Williams, and he was actually the first provincial game warden. He was given the position in 1905 to 1918, and very progressive, instrumental in a lot of the game laws that came in that era, including things like non-resident licenses. In 1913, there was a requirement enacted that non-residents hunting in British Columbia were required to have a guide. And that's one of the bases that the guiding industry is based on.
New guiding regulations were introduced in the 1940s and 1950s, creating different classes of guides and revising the way the growing guide outfitting industry was managed. Government then began to review and allocate guide territories, basing the structure on the success of the registered fur trapline system that had been created several decades earlier. Details concerning the structure of the guide outfitting industry were ironed out during the 1950s. 1961 marked a significant year for the guide outfitting industry. Guide territories were created, granting individuals exclusive rights to guide non-resident hunters within a specific area.
So from a guide outfitter's perspective, they have some species like black bear, for example. They're on general open season. So a guide outfitter will have some animals that are on quota, when the residents typically are on LEH, and some that are on general open season where you can come hunt with a guide outfitter if you're not from British Columbia, and they will have tags that they'll buy. So they'll have tags for black bear, for example. They'll have tags for elk if it's 6-point or better. And then there'll be other species, for example, sheep, that they'll be on quota. So they'll be given a specific number that they're allowed. The biologist will look, make an assessment of the population. They'll come up with a harvest rate, and then they'll divide that allocation between the resident hunting community from British Columbia and the guide outfitting community.
We have an interest in the wildlife. You know, we got there loving it, and now it's our job, it's our duty, you know, to make sure that those wildlife are healthy and that they remain, you know, those populations remain viable in our area.
An outfitter is probably the most conservationist there are. You know, we're looking after our area. We're farmers, really. Instead of got beef cattle, you got some moose out there, and you know how many you have. Even though if you have a quota of 20, some years you only maybe take 5, because it's just like a farmer. He needs so many replacement in his herd, and he runs it as a business and manages his herd. And outfitting, if you're going to be in for a long time, you have to do the same thing. You know, some years there's a bad winter, there's a big winter kill in sheep and goat. Back off and don't hunt them for a couple of years. And they'll come back around, and you're still in business.
My family and I, we treat it like basically like a farm or a ranch. I mean, it's a lifestyle. You know, the early years, it was tough. You know, we had to do extra all the time and sacrifice to make it go. But, you know, after putting in, we've been up there now 28 years. You know, there's starting to be a payback. We've raised 5 children. They've all had an active part in it. some larger than others, but then we have grandchildren now that are a big part of it. You know, our oldest grandson is 16. You know, he's wrangling, shooting horses, and so it's kind of cool, you know, to have a third generation in it already. And I don't feel that old. So that's kind of how we got started into it, and you know, it's just grown from there.
We care about the land, and we care about the wildlife out there, and I never get tired of seeing the elk on the hill outside my kitchen window, you know, and that never gets old.
When you see an organization like this one develop international wildlife symposia, when you see them launch genetic sampling assays for wildlife populations in the districts that they help manage and in which they hunt, these are really and truly unique efforts being made by this organization to show that they really do wish to be part of the ongoing and meaningful exercises for the conservation of the extraordinary wildlife legacy that British Columbia has.